That day was our wedding anniversary, and I had thought that maybe life was finally being a little kind to me. The banquet hall was filled with glass walls and glittering chandeliers, and everywhere I looked, Armand's business partners and relatives were standing and smiling. I was standing beside him in my simple traditional dress, carrying a strange uneasiness in my heart, as if something was about to go wrong. Armand's mother had passed away a year earlier, and there was only one person left in that house who still considered me his own, my father-in-law, Mr. Iqbal Khan. There was always a softness in his eyes that gave me a little courage. I had no idea that in just a few moments my life was about to turn into the biggest spectacle of all. The music slowly faded, and Armand stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. He said a few formal words, praised the business, thanked the guests, and then suddenly the tone of his voice changed. Just then, a woman in high heels and a shimmering red dress walked toward the stage. There was a strange confidence on her face, as if she were stepping into someone else's world and claiming it as her own. "Let me introduce myself," she said, and without permission she took the microphone. A heavy silence fell over the hall. "My name is Ria," she said, smiling while looking directly at me. "The truth of Armand's life that has been hidden until today." Faces around the room began to change. I wanted to say something, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. Ria spoke each word with force, as if she wanted to break me. "The woman you all think is his wife is a wife in name only. The real love belongs to me." Whispers began spreading through the crowd. Some people looked at me with pity, others with entertainment. Ria looked me up and down, my traditional dress, my jewelry, my face, and laughed. "She never understood Armand," she said. "All she knows how to do is run a household. Business, power, ambition, that's all meant for me." My hands were trembling. I was remembering the years of my life, the nights Armand came home late, the excuses, the exhaustion. Armand stood there silently. That silence hurt more than the humiliation itself. Ria stepped closer, looked straight at me, and said loudly, "And you should be ashamed. You should have understood long ago that you were never worthy." Some people in the hall laughed. For me, that laughter turned into a scream piercing my ears. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. Just then I felt someone take hold of my hand. I turned and saw my father-in-law standing there. His face was firm, but his eyes held both the same old warmth and anger. He pulled me closer to himself, as if becoming a wall between me and the world. "Enough," he said, his voice deep and steady. "This drama ends right here." Ria turned to look at him, and for the first time the smile vanished from her face. "Uncle," Ria said with fake sweetness, "are you trying to run away from the truth too?" My father-in-law took the microphone and looked around the entire hall. "The truth," he said. "The truth is that my daughter-in-law held this family together while my son was busy chasing money and city dreams. The truth is that the woman you think is weak gave this family its dignity." The hall fell silent. Every word of his echoed into every corner. Armand tried to speak, but my father-in-law raised his hand and stopped him. "Today you will not speak," he said. "Today you will listen." Then he turned toward Ria. "And you," his voice turned cold, "you think you've won, but you know nothing yet." Ria's face turned pale. The arrogance in her eyes slowly transformed into fear. It felt as if time had stopped. The people who had just been looking down on me were now looking at me with questioning eyes. My father-in-law tightened his grip on my hand, as if telling me I was not alone. Ria stood silent, frozen, as if her feet had been glued to the ground. Not a single word came out of her mouth. In that moment, I understood that humiliation doesn't only come from words, it also comes from silence. And when someone stands beside you, even the loudest mouth can fall silent. The hall was still silent, but the silence no longer belonged to her. It belonged to everyone who had just witnessed the shift of power. Ria stood frozen, her lips slightly parted as if words were forming in her mind but refusing to come out. She had come prepared to humiliate me, to crush me publicly, but she had not expected resistance, especially not from the one man whose approval mattered most in that room. My father-in-law straightened his shoulders and turned toward the guests, his voice calm but unwavering. "I have stayed quiet for a long time," he said. "I stayed quiet because I believed my son would find his way back. I believed he would remember the values he was raised with." His eyes moved to Arman, who now looked smaller than I had ever seen him. But silence becomes a sin when it protects injustice. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ria clenched her fists. "You're taking her side because you feel sorry for her," she snapped, "but pity doesn't change facts." She turned to Arman, her voice sharper. Tell them you love me." But every eye shifted to Arman. He opened his mouth then closed it again. His gaze dropped to the floor. That hesitation said everything. Ria laughed nervously, trying to regain control. "See?" she said loudly. "This is what weakness looks like." "Bah, that's enough," my father-in-law said again, more firmly this time. He took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me. "You mistake silence for weakness. My daughter-in-law stayed quiet, not because she was powerless, but because she was dignified." He turned toward me, and for the first time that evening, his voice softened. "You stood by this family when it mattered. You respected relationships even when you were disrespected." Then he looked back at Ria. "And you confuse attention with importance. There is a difference." Ria's face hardened. "So what now?" she challenged. "You'll throw me out and pretend this never happened?" "No," my father-in-law replied calmly. "We will acknowledge what happened. Publicly. Right here." He gestured toward Arman. "My son chose betrayal. That is his burden to carry." Arman flinched but said nothing. "And you," he continued, looking directly at Ria, "chose to weaponize another woman's pain for your own ego. That says everything about your character." The guests were no longer whispering. They were watching openly now. Phones were discreetly lowered, curiosity replacing amusement. Ria glanced around, realizing she was no longer the center of admiration, but of judgment. I finally found my voice. It was quiet, but steady. "You wanted to prove I was nothing," I said, meeting her eyes. "But you didn't need to do all this. If you wanted him, you could have taken him. I never begged him to stay." Ria's expression flickered, just for a second. "Don't act noble now," she scoffed. "I'm not acting," I replied. "I'm just done." That was the moment something shifted inside me. The shame I had been carrying loosened its grip. I realized I didn't need validation from a room full of strangers, or from a man who couldn't stand up for me. I straightened my back and gently removed my hand from my father-in-law's grip. He looked at me surprised. I gave him a small nod. Gratitude, strength, closure. "I won't stay where I'm not respected," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. Then I turned to my father-in-law. "But I will always be thankful that you saw me." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "You will always have my respect," he said, "no matter where you go." Ria laughed again, but this time it sounded hollow. "So you're leaving?" she mocked. "Walking away with nothing?" I smiled faintly. "I'm walking away with my self-respect. You can keep the rest." I picked up my purse and took one last look at Arman. He finally met my eyes, regret written clearly across his face. But it was too late. Some apologies expire the moment they're delayed too long. As I walked toward the exit, the sound of the hall slowly returned. Chairs scraping, hushed conversations, awkward coughs. No one stopped me, no one laughed, and no one dared to look me in the eye. Behind me I heard my father-in-law's voice one last time, firm and final. "This gathering is over." I stepped outside into the cool night air, breathing deeply for the first time in hours. I didn't know what my future looked like yet, but for the first time, I knew one thing for sure. I would never allow anyone to humiliate me again. The night after the incident felt longer than it should have. I returned home to a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were waiting for me to decide who I was going to be next. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same clothes, replaying every moment in my mind, not with pain this time, but with clarity. For years I had blamed myself for Arman's distance, for his silence, for his choices. That night, I finally understood that some betrayals are not born from neglect, but from character. My phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from relatives, missed calls from unknown numbers, and finally, Armand's name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to say. Silence, I realized, could be a boundary too. The next morning, I woke up lighter. The shame that once sat heavy on my chest was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. I made tea, opened the windows, and let the sunlight flood in. Life was still moving, and so would I. Later that day, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found my father-in-law standing there alone, holding a small cloth bag. His shoulders looked tired, but his eyes were calm. "May I come in?" he asked gently. I nodded and stepped aside. We sat across from each other in the living room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he placed the bag on the table and pushed it toward me. Inside were my wedding bangles, a few documents, and a folded letter. "I should have spoken sooner," he said quietly. "I thought staying neutral would keep the family together. I was wrong." I shook my head. "You spoke when it mattered." He looked at me with something close to pride. "You handled yesterday with dignity. That takes strength." There was a pause before he continued, his voice heavy. "Arman is lost. He has been for a long time. But that doesn't mean you deserved what happened." I took a slow breath. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want peace." He nodded. "And you deserve it." Then he stood, hesitated for a moment, and said, "No matter what happens next, you are always welcome in my home." After he left, I opened the letter. It was short, just a few lines written in his steady handwriting, acknowledging me not as a daughter-in-law, but as family. I folded it carefully and placed it somewhere safe. That evening, Arman came again, this time in person. He stood outside, eyes tired, confidence stripped away. "Please," he said softly, "just let me explain." I listened. Not because I owed him closure, but because I wanted my own. He spoke of confusion, of ego, of mistakes. He admitted his silence had been cowardice. When he finished, there was an expectant pause. "I forgive you," I said finally. His face lit up with hope. "But forgiveness doesn't mean staying," I added calmly. "Some chapters end even if we forgive the characters in them." He nodded slowly, understanding settling in at last. When he left, I didn't cry. I felt complete. Weeks passed, the whispers faded, the story moved on to something else, as gossip always does. I focused on rebuilding. Myself, my confidence, my routine, my sense of worth. I reconnected with old friends. I rediscovered parts of myself I had abandoned while trying to be enough for someone else. One afternoon, as I sat with a cup of tea by the window, my phone buzzed with a message from my father-in-law. "I'm proud of you," it read. I smiled. Because sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply walks away, head held high and never looks back. Months later, my life no longer revolved around what I had lost, but around what I was slowly building. The house felt warmer now, not because anything had changed in the walls, but because I had changed within them. I had learned how to sit with myself without feeling incomplete. Peace, I realized, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It simply settled in quietly when you stopped fighting for validation. Arman and I finalized the separation without drama. There were no public arguments, no last-minute emotional pleas, just signatures, quiet conversations, and an understanding that love cannot survive where respect is absent. When it was over, I felt relief, not emptiness. Relief that I had chosen myself. I saw my father-in-law occasionally. He never interfered, never questioned my decisions. He respected my boundaries in a way his son never had. Sometimes we would sit together and talk about ordinary things, books, old memories, the changing world. He never tried to justify Arman's actions. That honesty strengthened our bond more than forced loyalty ever could. Ria disappeared from our lives almost as quickly as she had entered. I heard through mutual acquaintances that things hadn't turned out the way she expected. The attentio she had chased didn't last. The excitement faded, And when Armand's silence replaced his promises, she was left standing alone with the same emptiness she had once tried to hand to me. I felt no satisfaction in that, just distance. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, I found my wedding album. For a moment I hesitated, then I opened it. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I simply acknowledged that the woman in those pictures had done the best she could with what she knew at the time. And that was enough. I closed the album and placed it back, not as a burden, but as a chapter that no longer defined me. Life didn't become perfect after that. There were still difficult days, still moments of doubt, but now, when those moments came, I faced them without shrinking. I had learned the power of walking away without bitterness, of holding dignity even when others try to strip it from you. The day I truly understood my growth was an ordinary one. I was standing in line at a cafe when a stranger accidentally bumped into me. He apologized quickly. I smiled and told him it was fine. The old me would have minimized herself, blamed herself. This version didn't need to. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's choosing yourself in small, quiet ways, every single day. That night, I sent one final message to my father-in-law, thanking him for standing by me when it mattered most. His reply came minutes later. "You reminded me what courage looks like," he wrote. I looked out the window, the city lights glowing softly in the distance, and felt something settle in my chest. Closure. I wasn't the woman who had been humiliated on a stage anymore. I was the woman who walked away with grace, supported by truth, and rebuilt her life without resentment. And that, I knew, was the greatest victory of all.